Five nuclear powers, the US, UK, France, China, and Russia, signed a joint statement this week to agree to avoid a nuclear war. Now, my guest today believes that the US should help Taiwan develop nuclear weapons. Gordon Chang is a prominent China expert and the author of The Great US-China Tech War. Gordon, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Natalie.
I've seen that you propose that the US should help Taiwan develop nuclear weapons. Why is that?
Well, first of all, I think the Biden administration should make a clear declaration that the United States will defend Taiwan and will offer a mutual defense treaty to Taipei. Now, if the Biden administration is not willing to do that, then I think the United States should help Taiwan develop nukes, and I think that the United States should actually transfer nukes to Taipei. And the reason is that it's going to take Taiwan a little bit of time to develop an arsenal. And in that time, it could be very dangerous because China could decide to strike. So I think that the United States needs to eliminate that gap and therefore transfer nuclear weapons. But my preferred solution is that the Biden administration just say, we will defend Taiwan and mean it.
So there have been some experts saying that that kind of clarity in U.S. defense policy might provoke a stronger reaction from China, a more aggressive reaction. What do you think of that?
Of course, we don't know exactly what China will do, but a clear declaration from the Biden administration, I think, will convince Beijing that force is not an option. And the reason is that China is extremely casualty averse. And it realizes that if the United States were to defend Taiwan, the casualties for Beijing would be horrific. They'd be probably so high that the Communist Party wouldn't survive. So we need clarity at this time. Now, of course, we've had this policy of strategic ambiguity for decades, where the United States doesn't tell either side, either Beijing or Taipei, what it would do in the case of imminent conflict. And of course, that policy worked. But that policy was in a benign period, and we're no longer in such a good era. So at this point, we need a clear declaration of what we will do. And if we have that, then we will preserve the peace. But without it, I think Beijing will decide that it could very well take an advantage, and the United States won't defend Taiwan.
So do you think that the U.S. would come to Taiwan's defense if China attacked Taiwan?
That's a great question. I would tend to think the U.S. would, but there are certain currents in the Biden administration that concern me. And we know that what China will do in the early stages of a conflict is to threaten nuclear war on the United States. And that could very well intimidate American policymakers. So although I tend to think the U.S. would defend Taiwan, I think that there's substantial uncertainty. And that substantial uncertainty in the minds of Beijing, I think, would be very provocative. That's why I think we need a clear declaration, because a clear declaration will mean that Beijing will decide that it's not worth the cost.
So you think that's the best way to deter a war?
Absolutely. We have, as Americans, when we have been unclear about what we're going to do, we have convinced aggressors that they can actually take an advantage. So the point is that if we're clear that we will defend Taiwan, then that really means for Beijing that they will not want to start. I'll just give you an example. We go back to 2020, June 15th. China, in a surprise attack, kills 20 Indian soldiers. But China doesn't announce its casualties until February of last year, and then they say there are only 4. Now, TASS, the Russian news agency, about 3-4 months ago, actually came out with a press release and said they basically thought that 45 Chinese soldiers were killed, which is essentially New Delhi's estimate. And that shows that Beijing is extremely worried about the news of dead Chinese soldiers. So they're more casualty averse than we are. And if they were to invade Taiwan and the U.S. were to defend it, China's casualties would be at least in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions. So I think that a clear declaration from the U.S. would deter China.
Now, you have said that China is actually very weak, or the leadership is weak, but they are projecting a very strong image and very strong-handed image. Tell us why you think that China is weak. It seems that, if they're casualty averse, like you say, that means that they are weak and afraid of public opinion.
First of all, they're on the edge of a debt crisis. China has perhaps somewhere between 350 to 400% of debt to GDP, and that clearly is unsustainable. China can't get past its debt crisis because there's just too much debt. But at the same time, they've got a stagnant economy, they've got worsening food shortages, they've got a depleted environment, and they have these accelerated COVID-19 outbreaks that they can't deal with. And in addition to that, China stands on the edge of the steepest projected demographic decline in history in the absence of war or disease. China, according to Chinese demographers, will lose about half its population in 45 years. So Chinese leaders are facing problems that they have no answers to. The thing that worries me, Natalie, is that they might see a closing window of opportunity, which you get a hint of in Chinese propaganda. And the other thing that's concerned is that I think that because of these problems, Xi Jinping is a lot weaker than he appears from the outside. And he very well may decide to cause military misadventure abroad to try to distract his domestic critics, to try to tamp down domestic discontent. And that means a weak China is more dangerous than a strong one.
And we've seen a lot of military activity around Taiwan, a lot of Chinese military planes. What do you make of that?
China's just trying to intimidate Taiwan into submission, which is really what they've been doing for quite some time. Sometimes they use non-military means. Now they're using these provocative flights through Taiwan's air defense identification zone. But it's a real indication that China is on a belligerent path. And although I don't think for certain reasons that China wants to start a war, the point is they're engaging in provocative military activities that could cause an accident. Could cause an accident with Taiwan or with the United States or with other countries. And because of that, they could start an unintentional conflict that could spiral out of control. So this is exceedingly dangerous time.
Your suggestion about a U.S. defense treaty with Taiwan, of course, Taiwan would love that. But what do you think the possibilities of the U.S. changing their policy is?
At this present moment, pretty low. The interesting thing is that Biden wants to defend Taiwan. We saw that from his answers with George Stephanopoulos of ABC News and with Anderson Cooper of CNN. But unfortunately, his administration tried to clean up his comments afterwards and say, oh, there's no change in U.S. policy. So I think there's disarray in the administration.
And what do you think Taiwan should be doing to help deter a war?
Taiwan should be putting much more money into its military, and it should be spending its money more wisely. It is buying stuff which I think probably is not that they don't need as much as other things. They need submarines, for instance. They need small crafts. They need hypersonic cruise missiles. They need weapons that will deter China and actually will be useful in a conflict. It's great that they're buying upgraded packages for their F-16s, but China's going to destroy every airfield in Taiwan in the first moments of a conflict. So I'm not so sure that those planes are going to be usable, but submarines certainly would be, and certainly cruise missiles that could hit Shanghai or military targets in China certainly would be useful.
And what do you think that other countries like the EU should be doing to help Taiwan and to help deter an attack?
Japan has been robust. Just this week, it's going to sign its reciprocal access agreement with Australia, which is certainly a sign of military partnership. Also, we have seen on the last week these joint exercises with the United States and Japan. And those are obviously meant to be used to train for a war with China over Taiwan. Taiwan, I think, needs to work with partners in the region. But that's really not so much a Taiwan question, because Taiwan, of course, is willing. It's a question of the partners working, deciding that they want to work very closely with Taiwan. And I think that one thing the United States can do, and Taiwan can encourage this, is to put more American troops into Taiwan. We had that revelation of a couple months ago that U.S. troops have been helping to train Taiwan troops. I mean, that was known, but the fact that it was disclosed was quite interesting. We just need to put more troops there, like a tripwire. We have 28,500 troops on the Korean Peninsula. Not enough to stop a North Korean invasion. But the reason why they are so important is because there's the tripwire. That North Korea knows that if it invades South Korea, the United States will get involved. And so we need tripwire American troops in Taiwan as well.
Well, it's been great talking with you, Gordon. I hope that you can influence U.S. policy, and we see more protection for Taiwan. Keep speaking out. Thank you so much. I've been speaking with Gordon Zhang, who is a prominent China expert, the author of The Coming Collapse of China and the Great U.S.-China Tech War.
Thank you so much, Natalie.